Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Feels like a very small Bon Jovi concert. I don't really have the hair for it, but work with that. So Urban Green Council is the New York City chapter of the USGDC. Really fantastic organization where I was privileged to work for almost 4 years. It's a full-time position there. There's about 10 full-time staff at that chapter, and they're doing a lot of really fantastic stuff. So I encourage you to check out what they're up to there. They're working on this amazing national program called GPRO, which is a Green Construction Skills Training Program. There's ongoing work implementing the recommendations of the New York City Green Coast Task Force, and lots of other really, really fun stuff. So definitely check them out. As Margot said, in June we developed what I think is a pretty unique conference, really focusing on the messaging and communications around green building. In a funny sort of way, the sort of genesis for the conference sort of started with this graph. Most of you are probably familiar with this concept of the diffusion of innovation and how innovations kind of move through society, sometimes haltingly. And a lot of people that have been looking at this have come to the sort of realization that green building is sort of really pushed through the innovators of the building industry. It's kind of pushed through most of the kind of early adopters within the building industry. But depending on what sector you're in, what market you're talking about, our next challenge is really making green building kind of standard operating procedure, pushing it into the mainstream. And there's a lot of different challenges to that. There's technical challenges, there's cultural challenges, there's education challenges. But one of the subjects that we felt like was important but didn't get very much attention, if any at all, was communications and messaging about this subject. So we put together the conference. We very much thought of it as a kind of a starting point for discussion, not looking to kind of promote any sort of individual or concrete solutions. Really just wanted to get the conversation started because we felt like it was a very new subject. But there's several themes kind of developed, and I'll talk about those. Because it was a relatively unique subject, we were able to really look outside the usual suspects for speakers. I won't go through all of them, but we had some really interesting people that we just wouldn't have grabbed on a more typical green building subject. We had Jeff Risley from Lawrence, Kansas, working for a really innovative nonprofit out there in just a totally different community from New York City. We had this guy, Jonathan Lang, from Deutsche Advertising, who, until I called him a couple of months before the conference, had never heard of LEED. And Dwayne Bray from IDEO, talking about this subject purely from a kind of communications media perspective, and really didn't know anything about green building, but it was huge to hear from these outside folks about the subject we all consider so familiar. So we used as a kind of framing piece the old adage, like, to think outside the box. So we put together 4 panels over the full-day conference, and they were sort of described thus. The first one was which box. So if you're going to be messaging about solutions, you have to kind of figure out, well, which solutions are we going to prioritize? We broke that down a little bit and talked about how you kind of can avoid the perils of greenwashing while you're looking at those different solutions, and whether there are some solutions that are more prone to that kind of communication. The second panel was inside the box, talking about internal communications within organizations. So how do you structure an organization and structure your messaging internally so that your goals as an organization are really clear for everybody, so that the sort of path to implementation is feasible. The third panel is called Outside the Box, and that panel really focused on communicating to your clients about potential clients, I guess, about your green services, green products, green materials. And then the fourth and final panel is a sort of slightly broader subject. If green building is going to become SOP, a lot of things have to happen. You have to have an educated professional group. You have to have an engaged building industry ready to move forward. But you also need a sort of general climate in the public that's friendly to these notions. So what can the building industry do in terms of messaging to kind of create a friendlier climate for some of the solutions that we're all kind of talking about and proposing? So what did we find inside our boxes? I broke it down into about 6 sort of themes that we came through, sort of got to through the course of the discussion all day. I don't think Bon Jovi gets 5 minutes. So one of the kind of really eye-opening moments for me in the conference is that Jeff Risley, the guy I mentioned before, he's the ED of a group called the Climate and Energy Project in Kansas. They advocate for renewable energy and specifically for, smart grid for distributed wind farms in the Plains States. And he listed these words, these phrases, not as super motivating factors for him, but as words that he basically cannot say out loud to his audience, or he loses them instantly. It was really, really fascinating to hear him say this. He basically said he can't ever say any of these words, or the people will just shut the door on him. So what do they talk about? They talk about jobs, but never green jobs, because that is a charged phrase in these sort of conservative rural communities. Talks about energy security, talks about foreign oil independence, economic prosperity, that sort of suite of things, but never ever climate change, which is really kind of fascinating to me and kind of colored how I read everything that happened over the course of the day. So the 6 sort of themes that came up. The first was goals. I think everyone kind of agreed that if you're going to motivate a group of people, you need to have really visible goalposts for everybody so they know where they're supposed to be going. It's a pretty simple thing. One of the interesting anecdotes was Curtis Ravenel, who gave a keynote at the conference. It's from Bloomberg, and they had a really aggressive sustainability program. And he made sure that every department had very specific target metrics, and he made sure that they had to report on their progress in a meeting in the chairman's office. Even if the chairman wasn't there for the meeting, it was in his office. So it was basically, you get all these people on board, they don't even know which direction you're pulling them. You use their kind of natural competitive tendencies, and they want credit for this. They're in the chairman's office. So that kind of motivation works. Keep it simple. All the kind of techno jargon that we are so fond of in our community, it makes us feel smart, it makes us feel part of the tribe, but it totally turns off people that are outside the tent. So anything you can do to kind of not talk about the kind of very techy systems and things, kind of come up with broader ways to discuss these things will really help your cause immensely. And also, there was a real theme in the conference that you had to keep it simple in terms of technologies as well. Be specific. I think when we started the conference, I would have thought that the answer to not being able to talk about abstract concepts like that climate change was to come up with some kind of unified, vague narrative that avoided all the details. But there was a lot of talk at the conference about the fact that you have to be really concrete and specific. Your audience may not be ready for environmental terminology, but they are, almost all of them, very savvy consumers of media. So anytime you're vague, they will know it immediately. Anytime you're not specific, they will turn away from you. Story, people talk about this a lot. Narrative is the fundamental component of human society. Metaphor is the fundamental component of our communications. Because they're so data-driven, we kind of avoid it sometimes. You have to remember that the general public needs narrative in order to move their needle. Judith Webb gave a great example in the conference. And you can talk about the credits in the IEQ credits in green schools, or you can talk about a drawer full of inhalers that have been removed from that school. And you know which one is more compelling. Solutions, really the basic thing here is talk about benefits, not technologies or systems or processes. Don't ask someone if they want to have a LEED certified home. Ask them if they want a 20% reduction in their energy. Ask them if they want clean air for their children. Talk about the benefits, and don't talk about your own internal processes. And the last theme is perseverance. The phrase that was used at the conference was, you can't boil the ocean all at once. You have to really gear your programs for incremental change. You have to be prepared for that and not be frustrated by it. And you have to remember that it's going to be an awful lot of hard work to get done what we're all talking about. So we had a journalist, Charles Lynn, do like a 4 or 5 page review, sort of summary of the conference, which is really well done. At this link, you can actually download the PDF of that. I encourage you to do that and check out all the other stuff at Leroy-Reed. Questions?